Good afternoon, or whatever time of day you're tuning into this panel. My name is Fenit Nirrapil, and today I'll be moderating our panel discussion on public service and not-for-profit careers. The Nexus initiative strives to feature a wide range of career paths pursued by Kerala Christians. I first got involved with this organization talking about my experiences as a reporter for the Washington Post, focused on holding the federal government responsible for its response to the coronavirus pandemic. It's my pleasure today to facilitate this discussion with a great group of panelists who have a wide range of careers. So let's meet them and let's have each panelist introduce themselves, talking more about themselves outside their jobs. So tell us your name, where you grew up, where you live now, and what's your favorite Indian food? So we'll start with you, Hazel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hazel. I grew up in Bergenfield, New Jersey, and I moved to the Midwest just about 6 months ago. I live and work in Chicago now, and I love all Indian food, but I think my favorite would be dosha and chamandi.
That's a good choice. Deborah, you're next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on. My name is Deborah Ninan. I actually was born and raised in Kuwait, which is where I lived until I was 14. My family immigrated to the US at 14, and then I lived in Ohio, which is where I went to undergrad, and then I moved to Maryland for law school, and so now I live in Maryland. My favorite Indian food would probably have to be appam and chicken curry, but the appam has to be sweet.
That's the best way to have appam, I agree. Julie, what about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Kumar. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. My parents both immigrated here back in the early 1970s. They actually met on the plane coming here to America. And so I was born here along with my sister. I am married now for almost 19 years, have 2 children, one 15 and one 12, both girls. And outside of work, I would say some of my interests include long distance running. I'm always trying to perfect my time and my distance. I also have a YouTube channel where I focus on makeup and all things makeup. I love makeup. It's my passion outside of work. So aside from my family, those 2 things keep me really busy. My favorite Indian food, I'd probably have to say, is probably beef curry and rice. It's one of the staples that I grew up on with my mom, and it's just a comfort food for me, and I love it.
Can't go wrong with a good beef curry. I've never figured out how to cook it well myself. And last but not least, Dan.
Hey, Fenit. Hi, guys. I'm Danie Samuel. I grew up in New Windsor, New York. It's about an hour and a half north of New York City. I'm right now down in DC. I actually worked up in New York until recently, and then I took a supervisory position down here. So I'm down in Washington, DC. So I had an Indian food in mind, but now that everyone just mentioned appam and chicken curry and beef, I'm like, you know what? I want all of that. So I like all of that actually, but chicken biryani.
That's a good solid choice too. And I'm a fellow Washingtonian as well, living in Washington, D.C. I grew up in the Georgia area originally, and actually I'm down with my family right now. And my mom treated me to my favorite Indian food, which is cup energy, as I got back, and it was a great return back to the home. So I guess now let's talk more about work and careers. We all know that many Malayali parents push their kids to go into professions with job security like medicine and engineering. So what made you decide to pursue your career, and how did you balance the risks versus the rewards? We'll start with Julie.
Well, both of my parents were actually public servants. My dad is a retired firefighter, and my mom is a retired nurse. So although they wanted me to focus on going into the medical field, I kind of wanted to step out of the box and do something different. So being the fact that my dad was a firefighter, he actually talked me into trying that. I actually was in advertising for a couple of years. I wasn't sure what I wanted to major in. And so I ended up doing that. But my dad talked me into joining the fire service, not as a firefighter, but as a fire inspector. And I really had never envisioned anything like that for my life. So it took him about a year of convincing me to try it, to do it. And so here now, almost 20 years later, I'm so glad that I took him up on that, because I would have never been where I was if I didn't take him up on that opportunity. It's not anything that I would have ever have seen myself doing. So I would have to say that they were actually very encouraging and very supportive of that because of their own careers.
That sounds fascinating. How about you, Deborah?
So my parents have always been supportive of me pursuing a career in the legal field. I was never into math or science growing up, so I knew that was not going to be, a career path for me. But really, what really got me into immigration law, particularly, was my family's own experience when we immigrated to the U.S. And then when I went to college, I was working with a professor and writing a paper or a thesis on immigration law. And I saw how immigration law really affected individual in their community, where we were particularly looking at women in the South Asian community and how, depending on their immigration status, they could be subject to domestic violence within the household, and how their immigration status kind of, furthered that. So that really got me interested in learning about how my experience as an immigrant was very different to someone else's. And then when I started working and was in law school, I came across, people in the Latino community, and their experience is totally different. So that is really what got me into immigration law. I really wanted to be able to provide, my background and use that as a resource to help other people as well. And my parents have always been supportive of that. And then recently in my career, when I, created my own law firm, they were super supportive of that, about that as well. They really wanted me to do that much earlier on, but I wasn't ready. But now is the time to do it, and they've been supportive of me since then.
Fascinating. And a lot of our families have been through the immigration process, so we know the need of having good immigration lawyers who can walk people through all the complexities. How about you, Hazel? How did you get into your career?
My parents, similarly to Julie and Deborah, have also been very supportive of whatever I wanted to study. And as a kid in my home around dinner, we would always be talking about the news. My dad and my grandmother would be reading the Malayalam Manorama, and then he would be telling me stories about things that were going on in India. And I just sort of translated that to things that are going on here. And so from a very young age, I was very interested in social issues. So my parents really encouraged that. So they were not surprised by any means when, I told them I wanted to major in international relations. I went to grad school for that. And they sort of almost expected that at some point I would attend law school. When I became a prosecutor, my parents were definitely a little taken aback, and I think maybe they were worried a little bit, but they've been incredibly supportive. I have always been pretty active in like speech and debate clubs in high school, and so it did not come as a surprise to them that I wanted to be a litigator, and they were very proud of that.
That's fantastic that you had that support along the way. How about you, Dan?
Well, you're certainly correct, Fenit. Malayali parents absolutely steer their children towards a medical or engineering field. And it's for good reason, right? We all want to see our loved ones succeed in proven career tracks. However, the world around us is changing all the time, and there's plenty of ways to become successful now. I've seen many friends leave jobs they worked very hard to attain in college due to various reasons over the years. And that never really used to happen with our parents' generation. It was sort of like if you didn't like what you did, where you worked, how much you made, or work-life balance, you kind of just stuck with it, right? You stayed put until retirement. Not so much anymore. So when choosing a career, even if you're pushed to do something, I guess it's sort of important to like kind of make sure that you like seeing yourself in the worst parts of the job before committing all those critical years in school to that goal. In regards to this question, though, for my profession personally, there's always crime, right? There's always going to be a need to like protect or defend people. So if we get hit with a pandemic, stock market crash, war, some sort of other disaster, whatever it might be, we certainly have job security covered. So I was looking at that angle. I was looking at a lot of things. I was a volunteer medic in my teenage years going into college. My parents were very supportive of that. And I always noticed my mom and dad, they liked, I don't know if it's a thing with Malayalis. I don't know if it's because we're Carolyn, we have this inherent nature within all of us. And I'm looking at all the features like to help others, right? Regardless of whether we end up in whatever field we end up in. But for myself, I knew of the obvious risks when entering law enforcement. And some people see that and they stop right there. And then I had to kind of think about it. And I realized what you get out of the career at the end of the day was way more important in the long run than any sort of risk that I was going to come across. So funny enough, majority of the people who become special agents in the FBI, they come from many backgrounds. Sitting next to me in the academy, we had former lawyers, engineers, CPAs, stockbrokers, pilots, teacher, just to name a few. And I guess we all reached a conclusion in our mind that the reward, whether it's helping others, protecting the nation, embarking on crazy adventures, it sort of outweighed the inherent risks. So 12 years later, I can kind of confirm that it does.
Great that it worked out for you. And it sounds like everyone had good support from their parents along the way. Although one thing that we all know from being Malayalis is that family goes beyond just your parents, because your aunties, your uncles, the grandparents, cousins, everyone's got their say in everything. Did you encounter any other resistance to your career path from other relatives or friends of families? And how did you assuage those concerns if you had them? Let's start with you, Deborah.
So I don't think anybody talked to me specifically about my career path, but I know that people would make comments about the type of immigration law that I practice. So a lot of my clients are individuals who are in removal or deportation proceedings, where they've perhaps crossed the border or they're here without any legal status. And so they are before an immigration judge and they have to seek relief in order to stay here and remain in the United States. I would get comments from people in our community about, why am I helping illegals, or why am I helping individuals? They were here illegally in the first place, they're breaking the law. And, I would try to convince them or talk to them about, the reasons why they were fleeing. Many of these individuals are fleeing because they're seeking persecution in their home country. They have no other opportunity than to leave their home and everything that they know in order to live safely. And so when I would talk to them about that and the reasons why people would do that, that would kind of open their eyes a little bit. And I think that's mostly what I would encounter practicing within immigration law, as opposed to anything else.
And Hazel, how about you? You mentioned that there were some questions about your decision to go into prosecution. Did people try to steer you into other aspects of law?
Yeah, and it didn't really come from like my parents or my aunt and uncles or anyone in my close family, but certainly like in the community, and your parents have everybody over. There were like uncles and aunties that were like, we don't know if like being a prosecutor is the right thing for a woman. And luckily my parents did not have that perspective. So I'm grateful for that. But certainly there were some comments here and there about the outspoken nature, or the nature that you have to maybe cultivate a little bit in order for you to be an effective advocate and to work in law enforcement. So there were some things here and there. And I think that just speaks to some level of sexism that still really exists within the Malayali community, especially when it comes to women that are doing or participating in careers that aren't considered the norm. But I just want to piggyback off something that Danie said earlier about our parents staying in certain jobs because they're the first generation, right? So I think about my parents' experience, and it's very much about survival and putting down roots in this country. Whereas luckily for us as the second generation, we have a little bit more flexibility and opportunity to flourish and pursue these paths that would not have been open to them at the time that they immigrated into the United States. So I think we're in like a very special time, and it really, really encourages me to see Malayali men and women doing all these amazing things that when I was younger, I had never seen a female firefighter or a female fire investigator. I didn't even know that that was something that was open for me. I'm the first Malayali female prosecutor that I know. I didn't know any female attorneys. I certainly didn't know that Malayalis went into the FBI. So I just love that all of us in this second generation are really, really expanding and taking up space and really being just like the living embodiment of, I think, what our parents envisioned when they came here, even if it looks a little bit different.
That's a great point, Hazel, because that's the line that I try to use a lot with relatives, which is, this is exactly what you made the sacrifice for, which is that we could have options and that your children could have so many different paths to pursue in life, and you don't have to be pigeonholed in one path or the other. So I understand the reticence of taking risks and pursuing risk, particularly for immigrants. But the flip side of that is that we also have opportunities for more rewarding lives, and to have paths that make us feel happier, and in some cases it can even lead to more financial stability too. Hazel, you described your experiences about the sexism with coming to law enforcement. Danie, you're also going into law enforcement, but as a man, I'm curious how your experience compared, and if there's any other resistance you encountered. I'm sure FBI must be scary to a lot of your relatives.
Yeah, I want to say luckily, I actually did not. I sort of did have the full support of my parents and my family overall, I guess. They sort of know I'm kind of headstrong to begin with. And maybe that had a little bit to do with it. Plus, I was always busy. I was always, almost want to say like I was hustling, doing a million things. I was doing the medic stuff on the side. I was doing the volunteer stuff on the side. I was starting up a company. And you know what? Stuff like that actually appeals to the Bureau as well. And they like that. They like someone who has a lot of stuff going on. And I sort of had that going on. So my parents probably were caught off guard a little bit, and family as well. But they probably thought it's just him, up to something again. And it's just something I wanted to do. It was in my mind. I gave it a shot. And so they knew that, okay, he's really trying for this. He really wants to do this. And I don't think they wanted to really stand in the way. Maybe that's what ended up happening. I don't know. But they were supportive of it. And I got to tell you, my brother, he's also in law enforcement. And he was in finance before this. And then he ended up as a police officer in New York, something that he always wanted to do. He had his heart set on, he ended up doing. And so I guess we both sort of knew that this was a career path that you can actually sort of make a difference in other people's lives, right? So I guess, I don't know, we both ended up in law enforcement. Now you got two guys. It's like one of those shows with the Blue family or whatever. And I calmed some of the concerns that my mom and dad have. Obviously they have common sense, and they have the obvious questions like, that people ask when you go into jobs like this. And so I detailed some of the critical training we receive, and maybe the levels of planning that we do before we do anything risky, like break down a door, whatever it is. And so just talking that over with them sort of helped a little bit. Hey, just remember, risks are inherent in anything any one of us does, right? Even driving to work. So you never know when your time is up, and all any one of us can really do is just live our lives to the best of our abilities. So that's sort of the mentality.
It makes me think too how a lot of the nurses in our community, they're experiencing risk right now with the coronavirus pandemic.
Exactly.
It's inescapable to have risks in any career path. Julie, your experience sounds unique because your father was really cheering you on along the way. How was that like?
It was great. Like Danie, my sister and I are actually both in law enforcement as well. She kind of followed in my footsteps. And so we're both arson investigators for Dallas. As far as resistance from other family members, I think there was concern and a little bit of fear because I am a female, and just that law enforcement aspect of it, they were kind of scared for me, and they asked, "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" But I agree with what Hazel said about how our parents kind of had to do what they had to do, and they had to stay in their positions, and we have that leeway to break some barriers. I would have never have thought that I would have been in the fire department, but once I got there, one of the main things that I knew I eventually wanted to do was to go to arson. I wasn't sure exactly what they did, but I knew that they were kind of the elite of the department. And I said to myself, okay, one day I'm going to do that. So when the time came, I did face challenges, personal challenges, because it's physically taxing going through a police academy at the age that I did. But at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure and convey to my two girls that there's nothing that they put their mind to or anything that they desire or want that they can't accomplish. So there were times where I reached out and I thought, okay, why am I doing this? Because it's hard. But I wanted to see it out for my daughters so that they knew that they know that they can do whatever they put their minds to. So I've always had my parents' support in everything. And, you know, my mom fears a little bit about things that we face every day. But for the most part, they are very supportive, very encouraging, and are always praying for us. So, you know, I agree with what everyone has said here. You know, this is, we're in a unique position where we have all these barriers to break and we are the first in a lot of things. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And one of the main things that I speak to young girls about is the word opportunity. When you have an opportunity, it's so important to at least just try it because you never know where it can take you. So that's kind of my career word that I always tell everyone. I'm here because of opportunity. And yeah, so as far as support, I pretty much have had everyone's support.
That's great that you're able to set that example for your daughters as well. I mean, for me personally, I went to journalism school, but my plan was to go to law school. And, you know, journalism school, that industry in particular is one of the least stable of any. And that set off a lot of heartburn. But people thought, okay, but he's going to be a lawyer. But then I was starting to like journalism and I decided to go down the journalism path anyway. And even like I would come home for the holidays and like my first few jobs were not stable, like low paid. And people would be like, okay, that's nice. When are you going to go to law school? And then it ended up working out for me. I got a position at the Washington Post. And, you know, even though that's a great career, that's a great place for me to be in my career, I appeared on a CNN panel one time for like less than 30 seconds. And now it's all the Malayalis in the community in Georgia can talk about. They always ask about the time I was on CNN. So it's the kind of thing that did ultimately work out. And, you know, I understand where people's hesitancy came from, but people ultimately rallied around me. So I'm curious if any of you encountered other Malayalis in your industry, because a lot of us have been trailblazers. And if not, what other ways have you found to stay in touch with the community? What about you, Hazel? You mentioned being one of the first Malayali prosecutors.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know any female Malayali prosecutors. There are certainly a couple male Malayali prosecutors. And I mean, one of them actually, when I first started, I think I was like a month into practice. And sometimes when you go in front of a new judge, there's a decent amount of judicial hazing. They'll like ask you super complicated questions for no reason. And this judge was giving me a really, really hard time. And randomly, I just hear someone whispering what seems like the right answer behind me. So I just started saying what this person behind me was saying, and it sort of seemed to mollify the judge a little bit. So I sat down, and afterwards I turned around, and it was this senior Malayali defense attorney. His name was Varghese Korean, and now he's at the Philadelphia DA's office. But he was just helping me out because we had seen each other maybe a couple of times in the hallway and sort of nodded because we look Indian or look Malayali. And it was just such a moment of community for me because, I mean, there were plenty of other people that I worked with in that courtroom and no one was saying anything. And here's this Malayali defense attorney that was helping me. And I was just forever grateful for that 5 minutes of his time. But it just relays the importance of having people's back and especially having supporting other Malayali people that are in your career or even outside of your career in any way possible. You know, we're all like, my parents have always instilled in me this idea that like, you're part of like this larger Malayali family and you have to help everybody. So I think that's really important.
That's great that there was that mutual support. Danie, were there other Malayalis at the FBI Academy?
No, not at the academy, but along the way, you know, luckily I got a chance to like travel to the U.S. a few different divisions from Seattle to all the Midwestern states. And guess what, guys? We actually have other Malayalis in the FBI, and it was a great feeling. because yeah, you're right. It's I'm not going to put a number on it because this isn't a vetted answer, but it almost feels like 90+% is of another race, right? You don't see a lot of diversity that much sometimes. But I'll tell you what, I ran into a couple other agents from Chicago and down here in DC, who was also a supervisor, who are Malayalis. And they both had military and legal backgrounds, very amazing backgrounds. And they were agents with us, and we were all working different violations. And out of respect for their privacy, I'm not going to say anything more about that. I also ran into some analysts and some technicians, like specialists. We have over like hundreds of titles, right? If you're not an agent or an analyst, we still have a plethora of support staff positions. And so anytime you see a Verghese or something like that, and I got to pounce on it. I got to hit him up on our classified server and say hello first, and then so they know that I'm legit, and then reach out to them on the other side. And I got to tell you something else while we're still on this topic, with people going into these careers. Just this year alone, since we're talking about law enforcement right now, we established the American Malayali Law Enforcement United, AMLEU. It was just established in 2020, and it's an association of over 150 sworn Malayali law enforcement officers from different agencies. And because of this, I have now met a Malayali ATF and a Homeland Security agent. And then we have police officers from everywhere, from Chicago to Dallas, Houston, out in Cali. And I just, when it comes to NYPD, I want to say like dozens of NYPD guys, detectives, lieutenants, and it's amazing. So this group was just established this year, right? So in terms of where we are as Malayalis and the landscape, and when we're looking at careers and what we want to do, this group just started this year, guys. All right, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, we're going to look back, and it wasn't from 20 years ago. It was 2020, and it's literally like 3 months into inception, and it brought together everybody on WhatsApp together first, and with all the legal paperwork and everything was formally established about like a week ago. So while we're on this topic, just wanted to highlight that. And Julie, Kumar, now that I see, because of Nexus, thank you, Nexus. I did not know that. And so you and your sister, we're going to have to go ahead, and unless you're already on there, and I don't even know.
No, we're not. I had no idea.
Well, there you go.
This is how community building happens.
Thank you, Nexus. But so we'll link up offline, and we'll talk more about that.
Definitely.
All right, we're coming up on the end of our time. So Deborah, do you have any connections in the immigration law community, and any advice you'd give a fellow Malayalis trying to break in?
Yeah, so I think I know one other immigration lawyer in the DMV area that does kind of what I do, which is more removal defense. A lot of the other Malayalis that I know, they tend to go into family-based immigration or employment-based immigration. So that's there. For anybody that's trying to get into possibly removal defense, I will tell you my own story was that I didn't want to go into removal defense. I didn't see myself as a litigator. I didn't see myself appearing before an immigration judge. But what really opened my eyes was understanding these individual struggles, like these immigrant struggles, and how I could play a role in helping them and be their advocate, because there is no right to counsel for individuals who are in immigration proceedings. So it's really up to you to be their advocate. And I think it made a huge difference, for me to be able to see what that was doing to other people's lives. And I think, you can do the same thing for anybody who is trying to go into immigration law or represent individuals who are in removal proceedings. There's a lot to be done. There's so much to be done. And, there's more so in the upcoming years. And I think there's always a place for more Malayalis in the immigration field.
And that's all the time we have. I wish we had more, because this is such a great conversation, but that's the value of having a group like the Nexus initiative, that we can have these conversations both online and offline. So thank you so much to all the panelists for coming here today, and I hope everyone who views this will learn so much more about how much support you will find in addition to any resistance you might face entering into law enforcement or public service careers.